Few motorcycles can claim to have been the teacher of an entire generation, but the Suzuki GS500 can. An indestructible, reliable machine, so loyal that it has lasted longer than many love stories. But how did such a simple motorcycle become a legend? What made it withstand the test of time while others disappeared? Today we'll talk about the Suzuki GS500, the motorcycle that never gives up. By the late 80s, Suzuki was already a giant in the world of sport motorcycles. The GSXR750 had revolutionized the market with its combination of power and lightness, setting a new standard in the high-performance sport bike segment. However, not everyone wanted a bike capable of leaving your neck feeling like an accordion after every acceleration. At that time, the Japanese brands were in a full-blown war for supremacy to dominate every niche of the market. And while Honda had its CB500 and Kawasaki was experimenting with the GPZ500, Suzuki noticed a significant gap. There was a lack of a simple, accessible and reliable motorcycle for those who wanted something more than a 125cc but without the scare of a supersport. It was then, in 1989, that the Suzuki GS500E was born, a motorcycle that seemed to have been designed with just one thing in mind: being practical and lasting a lifetime. The GS500 quickly made a name for itself. The secret? It was practically indestructible. Unlike other bikes of its era that required constant adjustments, complicated maintenance, and expensive parts, the GS500 was a model of extreme simplicity. There were absolutely no electronic systems that could fail, not a single one, no experimental technology, just an engine tested to exhaustion and built to withstand absolutely anything. What made it so reliable? A simple, no-nonsense engine. A parallel twin engine with 487 cubic centimeters, air-cooled with no electronic fuel injection or liquid cooling systems that could cause trouble. Carburetors? Yes, but the kind you could adjust with a screwdriver and a bit of patience. Maintenance was ridiculously cheap. You didn't need a master's degree in engineering to give it a checkup, change the oil, replace the filter, tighten the chain, and that was it. Any mechanic could fix it with their eyes closed, if it ever even broke down. Minimal fuel consumption. At a time when sport bikes guzzled fuel like fighter jets, the GS500 could go over 300 kilometers on a single tank. For a student or anyone on a tight budget, it was a blessing. Its lightweight, stable chassis and progressive power made it the perfect bike to learn on. It wasn't aggressive, but it wasn't boring either. And best of all, if you fell, you just picked it up and kept going like nothing happened. Mechanics hated it. There were no breakdowns, no electrical problems, and the only trips to the mechanic were to change the oil, tires, and brake pads. Suzuki had created a foolproof bike and the world took notice. Throughout its history, the Suzuki GS500 received small but important upgrades that kept it relevant and reliable for more than 2 decades. It wasn't created to be a technological revolution, but rather to be a durable, economical, and easy-to-maintain motorcycle. But that didn't mean Suzuki didn't improve it over time. In the mid-90s, Suzuki made improvements to the carburetors in order to make fuel consumption more efficient. The power delivery was also carefully adjusted to make it more progressive, and small modifications were made to the exhaust system to comply with new environmental regulations. In 1996, the GS500 received a more ergonomic seat, specifically designed to improve comfort on long trips. Additionally, the front fork was reinforced for better stability, especially in corners and at high speeds. By 2001, Suzuki made one of the most significant changes, a stiffer frame, which increased the bike's stability and handling. Some aesthetic details were also updated, such as the fuel tank and new color combinations. In 2004, Suzuki decided to give its legendary entry-level motorcycle a fresh new look. The GS500F arrived with a full fairing, inspired by the GSXR family of sport bikes. but without altering its reliable 487 cubic centimeter engine. Was it faster? Not really. The engine remained the same. Did it look like a bigger and more aggressive bike? Absolutely. Was it just as reliable and easy to maintain? Of course. The GS500F attracted a new audience who wanted a bike with a sportier look, without the costs or demands of a super sport. It became the ideal option for those who wanted a versatile motorcycle, perfect for everyday use but with a more striking design. And you know what? Despite the improvements, the essence of the GS500 never changed. A reliable twin-cylinder engine, low fuel consumption, cheap maintenance, and a simple yet effective design. Over the years, Suzuki did just enough to keep it competitive, without complicating it with unnecessary technology, because why change what already works? It was the perfect bike for beginners, travelers, and anyone looking for a reliable, economical motorcycle ready for any challenge. Throughout its history, the Suzuki GS500 was not alone. Competition in the mid-displacement motorcycle segment was fierce, and although it didn't have the latest technology or the most refined finishes, it managed to stand out in the market thanks to a combination of price, reliability, and ease of maintenance. Honda CB500, more power, but also more expensive. The Honda CB500 was one of its strongest rivals. It featured a 4,989cc twin-cylinder engine, liquid cooling, and about 10 more horsepower than the GS500. In addition, it had a more advanced chassis and higher quality suspension, which made it more stable and refined. The problem? It was more expensive, both to buy and to maintain. The electronic fuel injection and its more advanced engine required more expensive adjustments, and the spare parts were not as accessible as Suzuki's. For a beginner or someone who just wanted an affordable bike for everyday use, the GS500 was still the best option. And on the other hand, Kawasaki entered the competition with the ER-5, a bike with a very similar approach to the GS500. Twin-cylinder engine, air cooling, easy to handle, and cheap to maintain. However, the ER-5 never reached the level of popularity of the GS500. Why? Its design was more understated. The distribution of spare parts was not as efficient, and it didn't have the reputation for being an indestructible tank that Suzuki had earned over the years. Why did the GS500 win the battle? If you put these three bikes in a ring, the GS500 didn't win for being the fastest or the most advanced, but for being the most accessible, the most reliable, and the easiest to maintain. It was cheaper than the CB500 and the ER-5. Legendary reliability, it could handle all kinds of use without complaints, easy maintenance, carburetors that were simple to adjust, a straightforward engine, and inexpensive spare parts. It didn't aim to be the best motorcycle in history, but rather the perfect bike to start with, to learn on, and to travel thousands of kilometers without worries. And that's why it became the queen of beginner motorcycles. Like everything in life, even legends must say goodbye. And in 2010, Suzuki made the difficult decision to discontinue the GS500. Why did Suzuki take it off the market? Stricter anti-pollution regulations were a hard blow for the GS500, which used an air-cooled carbureted engine, a reliable but outdated technology. With the arrival of stricter environmental standards, such as the Euro 3 regulation, Suzuki had to either modernize the bike or remove it from the market. To comply with these regulations, it would have been necessary to add electronic fuel injection and probably liquid cooling. But that would have meant making the bike more expensive and more complex, losing its essence as a simple and affordable model. There were already more advanced and appealing options on the market, such as the Suzuki SB650, with a V-twin engine, electronic fuel injection, and much higher performance. The GS500, with its 80s design, could no longer compete in the same segment. Moreover, other brands were also offering more modern bikes for beginners, such as the Kawasaki Ninja 500, and later the Ninja 650, the Honda CBR 500R, and the Yamaha XJ600. all with better performance and more up-to-date technology. It was a design that was already showing its age. Despite its minor updates, the GS500 remained a bike with a basic structure, featuring a chassis and suspension that hadn't changed much since its launch in 1989. It could no longer compete with the new generation of bikes, and so it was time for it to retire. And although Suzuki discontinued the GS500, its legacy lives on. Many units are still on the road around the world, proving that this bike was not only a great training ground for new riders, but also a benchmark for reliability. And even though Suzuki did not release a direct successor, its spirit lives on in more modern models. So even though the GS500 is no longer being manufactured, its story isn't over, because as long as there's one on the road, its legend will live on. So if you're looking for a cheap bike that's easy to repair and won't let you down, the GS500 is still one of the best options on the used market. Few bikes have achieved what the GS500 has. Affordable, durable, and easy to handle. A bike that, even though it's no longer being produced, is still riding all over the world. And if you want to discover an affordable Honda motorcycle that changed the game with its incredible engine, click on this video, and I'll see you there.